How is everybody doing? Happy Friday for a lot of you guys. It's so nice to see everybody. Hello to Rosa and Soaring Davis. Hello, welcome. Natalie, how are you? Mel, Rochelle, how are you guys? So, a couple of quick announcements. I won't go into it too much right now, but a few are: number one, we're going to have an announcements board up very soon, which is very exciting. Number two, our Overcoming Rejection and Social Anxiety course will be coming out any day now, so stay tuned for that. Number three, we are going to be opening up our January social routines and events still. One thing I wanted to touch on is these have been in really, really high demand, which I think is fantastic, and I'm so excited about. But one thing that's happening is sometimes people are booking and then they're reserving the slot, so people can't actually go in and access and have new slots, and then not coming. So just do me one favor. It's totally okay if you can't come, but if you are not able to make it, try to unbook your slot. I don't know who it is or anything like that. I'm not trying to call anybody out, but I've just been told that that's happening from our team members. And then there's a lot of people that want to join. And so if you can, make sure that you unbook your slots just so that other people can jump in there. And then again, we're gathering sort of final feedback from everybody. And then we're going to be adding some more very shortly. So they won't just be booked up till January, but actually we'll have more throughout December that will be additional. So stay tuned for that. Today we're doing our Advanced Anxious Preoccupied workbook. We've left off at exercise. I was just going through them. I believe exercise 4. Yes, we've left off at exercise 4 on the top of page 9. So if you can, make sure that you print off your workbook so you can follow along, or feel free to pull it up, and as long as you click download, you now will have the fillable version available. So you can go in there and you can actually fill it out on your computer, which we're really excited about. So check that out as well. And then our course for next month that we're going to be coming out with, and we're going to try to do one course for next month, because a lot of the feedback we're getting is that it feels like there's an overwhelming amount of content, which is probably me, because I love creating content and pushing it out and being like, oh, I'm going to share this, and I have all these ideas all the time. So I'm going to settle down a little bit, give you guys a chance to feel a little more integrated, and also we're going to do a little bit of additional stuff on the user experience. So on that announcement board, for example, I'm going to have a weekly video that just gives you some tips in there just for our members, just to say, look, here, don't pressure yourself. Don't stress about how much you get done. Just be consistent, show up for yourself, these sorts of things. So I'll put in a little bit of an encouragement on a weekly basis in there. And we're going to design it so that we can section off the courses a little bit differently, and update our course guide, all that kind of stuff. So you really have this framework. And if anybody has feedback in terms of where they get stuck, please keep in mind, we do have that course guide. So if you're like, what courses do I do in what order? But we also have a lot of people at this point who've been here for a very long time and who've completed all the courses on the course guide. And so we're going to create once you're starting to really feel secure, here are some follow-up courses based on your attachment style, and coming out of that attachment style and what to do in which order. So we're going to have that extra support system for people who've already completed those first 8 to 10 courses and want to keep expanding out and want some more guidance there. So lots of exciting things always happening and growing. Another thing we're doing for user experience, and again, it's going to take a while to build out, but we're in the very, very early stages of building out an app so that you'll have reminders on your phone, you'll have check-ins, you'll have the ability to, again, this is long-term, but you'll have the ability to have a self-soothing part. So oh, something came up for you, you'll be able to type and go through the emotional processing tool in the app. You'll have webinar reminders. You'll be able to download and just listen to the audio from webinars, all these different things. So that is all the exciting stuff coming up. So what I will do is I will answer the first 3 or 4 questions in here. Good evening, Natalie. I wonder where you are. I didn't realize it was evening for you. For some reason, I thought you were in California. So pull this up. I'll answer the first 3 or 4 questions, and then we'll dive right into some of the exercises. And we're going to talk a lot about the dating phase, protest behaviors, coping mechanisms, the honeymoon phase, some things that come up, really making sure that you have a strong sense of self-identity as the anxious preoccupied, because this is going to save you so much stress long term. And a few quick tweaks can make a really big difference. So we're going to talk about all of this today. So Rosa is the first question. How are you, Rosa? It's so nice to see you. So you said, my daughter is being covertly bullied in school. A girl is giving her nasty looks when my girl tries to speak to her. This is going on for years. My daughter hit her as she said, my daughter hit her as she had enough and is now in trouble, as mom of girl has called it assault and unprovoked. My daughter is so stressed she took the day off school. She's 10. How can she deal with someone leaving her out, dismissing her, as she really wants to be friends with everyone? The other girl is saying she punched her. She really wants to be friends with everyone. The other girl is saying she punched her, and my daughter is very upset. She had already immediately apologized to the girl for hitting her. How can we deal with someone who is being really clever about bullying someone? The girl was caught excluding my daughter by a teacher a few years ago, but nothing much happened, and she continues to be mean to my DD. Thanks, Thais, for any insight. Okay, sorry to hear that your daughter's going through that, and I know as a parent, it's like very challenging to not just take it all on and really, really feel so much concern and just want to sort of fix and control everything. And I've seen a lot of people go through that over the years, and I know it's a tough challenge. So number one, there's a few things in here. So number one, there's a wound, right? Your daughter has a big wound to the point where it caused like that output of behavior. I absolutely do not agree with covert bullying or bullying of any form, and I think that has to be addressed and acknowledged, and I think that has to be held space for with your daughter. But at the same time, that's not an appropriate response, right? To physically lash out. So, and what that tells you really is that there's a whole buildup there of resentment and pain that obviously was probably touching some kind of core wound. So there's a few layers in here to sort of unpack. So layer number one, you want to validate your daughter's feelings. Like, obviously for somebody to do that, they felt so much pain. And as a 10-year-old, your prefrontal cortex isn't developed and you don't have the same impulse control and all these different things. So what that tells you really clearly is like, there's a lot of pain going on there. So number one, I would really make space for that, which it sounds like you're sort of doing in the first place. But if you want like a specific structure for it, validate her feelings. Okay, I see that you were in so much pain that caused that. I see that there was a lot of hurt there and that was happening. I see that you felt probably helpless and out of control because you had this person doing this to you for years and it just came to this tipping point. So you want to have that ability to empathize with her, because you're really showing her to be able to empathize and humanize herself. And at the same time, that can't be mutually exclusive to like accountability and boundaries, right? So you want to start with that. Then you want to go into, well, before you even go to the accountability part, you really want to go into inquiry, like really trying to understand it. And not because necessarily you need to understand it as a parent perfectly, but you need to help her to understand herself, right? So then I would go into inquiry and I would say, what led up to that? What were you feeling? What about the situation? Like, we can fill in the blanks, but we're never going to have the perfect awareness of exactly what the core wounds are by just filling in the blanks. So, because you might go, oh, she was really upset. But as you unpack it with her, you might find, she has a huge pain point around feeling weak. And that's what led to it. She was like, I'm tired of feeling like I just put up with stuff and that's it. Or she might have a huge pain point or a core wound around feeling excluded. And maybe there's been a history of that in other circumstances, or maybe there's a painful memory in kindergarten she went through. Like, there can be so many different things. And that's why you want to ask. Okay. And then number three, based on that core wound that you hear, or that huge like underlying pattern, it'll be really important to do some work around that story with her. So if she thinks that she's disliked, or she's not lovable, or she's not, I guess you wouldn't feel that way with kids so much, but like not likable with peers, or whatever it might be, whatever the huge pain point, or maybe a couple pain points in there are, you want to help her tell the opposing story repetitively and see evidence for it so that she's reprogramming that wound within herself. And that will be you addressing and helping to address within her the root cause of what led to that painful behavior. The more intense the behavior, the more painful the underlying root is. Okay. So that will be the first step. And then you want to have an accountability component. So we've empathized, we've humanized, we've seen the pain, we've held space for it, we've inquired, we've sought to understand what's really happening so we can address the root. We have a path for compensating with that root, helping her tell a new story, helping her see herself in a new light to help reprogram that. And then we move into the accountability component. So we look at like, hey, what was the cost? You know, what happened? And it sounds like she's already apologized, and she's probably, you know, it sounds like she's really stressed, but she'll actually feel a sense of relief by having a plan in place, a strategy. Like, hey, what do you do next time if this happens? It's okay to make mistakes. You know, you're a child, you're going to grow up, you're going to go through things like this. What's the plan for next time? What do we do in the future? What does that look like? What's, you know, if you're feeling that amount of pain, what can you do? If she feels like she has a control strategy to deal with that, not only does she get accountability for that, and she has a plan in place, and she has a better solution going into the future, but she'll feel a sense of relief, like, oh, okay, I have a form of control now. I know what I can do. And then, you know, I would address with the teachers and the, you know, if the conversation's coming up, I would say, you know, this is what's been happening. Here's where it's coming from. We talked about it. We did the work around it. I'm realizing this is a component. And ultimately, the more she has those pain points relieved, and those core wounds reprogrammed over time, the more comfortable she's going to feel connecting and doing all these different things anyways, even if somebody's being a bit of a you know, not so great person, like somebody sort of bullying and doing stuff like that. You know, ultimately, if she doesn't have those wounds in place, she'll be able to handle that with more resilience and just handle it more effectively. So those are some really good first steps to take. And thank you for sharing that. And I hope she's okay. You know, I think it's hard too when we're kids. We think everything's like the biggest deal ever and it's impossible to recover from. But one day she'll probably be this really beautiful grown adult, and she's got a mother who's helping her and is going to help her navigate this from a more conscious perspective and give her these great habits. And one day you and her will get to look back and sort of laugh at like, oh, this thing happened. I can't believe you did that when you were 10 years old. And sort of hopefully joke about it and see all the beautiful things and the growth and the awareness and learning that came from it, as long as you stick to that path. So great share. Okay, so Soaring Davis, hello, how are you? So Soaring Davis says, hello, I hope all who celebrated Thanksgiving had a good day, and those who didn't, I hope you had a good day too. That's so sweet. Yeah, happy belated Thanksgiving to everybody. I guess it's still like Thanksgiving weekend. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I think I went to school in the US. I was there for like almost 7 years. But I forget how the Thanksgiving's different in Canada. We have like one day, it's in October, that's it. So interested to hear. I guess, is it Thursday and Monday that you do it? Anyways, happy Thanksgiving to everybody still. Okay, so Rochelle says, just a quick feedback. The Zoom calls are a great way for me to practice the exposure work around vulnerability. I attended Zoom calls this week and tried communicating openly face-to-face. I did experience some shame hangover after the calls ended, but I was also very excited about stepping outside of my comfort zone and got that dopamine rush. Both Mike and Joanna are really good. Also, according to my time zone, I am attending 2 live webinars with you today, one early morning and one late evening. And also had the morning routine call with Joanna. Oh, I see. I don't have 2 webinars today. 2 webinars are tomorrow for Saturday. But we have the call webinars. I think that's what you mean. I'm like, I hope nobody thinks I'm on a second webinar today. Morning and late evening, and also had the morning routine call with Joanna, which was cool, as so much personal development stuff got done today. That's amazing. My question is, how does an AA behave when it was so good for you for just working so hard, Rochelle? My question is, how does an AA behave when someone else acts AA with them? Do they withdraw or become more avoidant in this case? It's a great question. Okay, so what often happens is there will be a polarizing, because a relationship dynamic ultimately seeks some form of homeostasis. It's an interesting thing. We seek that internally, but we also seek that within our relationship dynamics externally. So what can happen is basically whoever's more anxious will tend to polarize the other person to a more avoidant space. If both people are very highly anxious, they can feel like they really hit it off at the beginning. And in that sort of like dating phase, even if it's a friendship and it's like the vetting phase of a friendship, they can feel like they have that sort of connection there. But eventually, the more anxious person will tend to polarize the other person a little bit, where they can feel like there's too many demands, things like this. And because both of the anxious, preoccupied people in a romantic relationship won't represent a subconscious comfort zone of another, at least not in their attachment style, which is a huge foundational component. Um, it's very rare to see relationships actually make it past the honeymoon phase of people with the same attachment style that's a very similar degree of that attachment style. We can have somebody who's secure with some anxious parts and somebody who's very anxious, and they can be sort of rooted in a different attachment style but share a bit of a commonality in certain ways. But if people are very much the same attachment style and to the same degree, it's rare that the relationship lasts long term, because there's a subconscious kind of like repelling that takes place. Because remember, so much of attraction is based on our subconscious comfort zone, and that's in our internal reality. That's not in our external reality. So that's in the relationship we have to ourselves and the behaviors we enact in the relationship to ourselves. So an anxious person is often in a dismissive relationship to themselves, which means they're going to feel love being familiar and exciting when somebody's treating them the way they treat themselves. That's going to represent that subconscious comfort zone. So without that, there often is less attraction between people, as that's one of three fundamental parts. There can be other factors at play, and it's not so like all or nothing one way or the other, but without that, there is a lack of momentum that will often build in those relationships long term. So it's a great question. And thank you, by the way, for the feedback. That's super, super happy. I'm glad that you're getting so much out of the face-to-face Zoom calls. I'm going to jump in on those from time to time to say hello and to see people as well. Okay, so Mel. Hello, Mel. How are you? So Mel says, hi, Days. Thank you so much for your content. Thank you. Joining the school a few months ago has already had a huge impact on my life. Amazing. That's so happy to hear. I have a question about the stability/commitment stage of a relationship. I'm now testing 60% secure and 40% AA, which makes me feel really positive about where I am as an individual. That's so exciting. It means you're rooted and secure. And anxious has now become your secondary attachment style. Would you say both partners need to be predominantly secure to be in the stability stage? Excellent. Excellent question. Or is it common for one partner to be catching up to the other if both are insecure attachments? Yes. Okay, so excellent question. If one person is very secure, you can make it to the stability stage. And if one person's really secure, who's enacting a lot of like leading the way securely, yes, you can make it to the stability stage. However, at some point, the other partner has to catch up. So what I'll see often in relationship dynamics, and I want to be really careful about how I say this, and I want you guys to be really careful about how you hear this, because I don't want it to produce all this like false hope and unnecessary burden on one person. But something that I've experienced often working with couples is that one person would come in first and be like, my partner doesn't want to do the work. They're afraid to come in and do sessions. They feel uncomfortable. Can I do this on my own? And if that one person historically would show up to the nth degree and do the work and do the reprogramming and have the communication, as long as the other person was participating, as long as the other person was willing to have that tough conversation, if it was structured in a healthy way, which if we structure our healthy conversations in an effective enough way, that they land, right? So this can be in a way exempt from like really extremes, but if one person's willing to say, hey, these are my needs, and what are your needs, and to introduce these concepts and ideas, and the other person's willing to participate, what we could see is one person becomes really secure. The other person isn't necessarily doing the work on themselves, But because they start communicating differently, having a different model of behavior, having a different model of interaction, recognizing that their stories and their wounds aren't fully true, questioning some of these things because they come up in the conversations that the other person is leading. What commonly would happen is that we would see one person really do the work on themselves, become secure, and the other person is basically playing catch up over time. And because whatever we are repeatedly exposed to that elicits an emotional response is reprogramming. So, in a way, as long as the person is willing to participate, the reprogramming can still occur, and one person can get into the stability mode, bring the other person in. The other person still might have these wounds that are directing what their attachment style is rooted in, but they're basically as a byproduct of how they're showing up in the relationship and having that relationship led by example by somebody else. Over time, they are reprogramming their attachment style. So there's a catch-up component. Now, the reason I said I want to be really careful about how I say this is there's a very careful line to walk between like one person going in and being like, I'm going to do the work for both people. And we don't want to get into that position. So we can lead by example, but we have to be very, very, very clear that the other person is showing up. It's not one person and the burden falls on the other person. It's like one person is leading the way, maybe, but the other person has to be following and keeping up and integrating. And so that has to be a really clear set of parameters that you guys have to check in with. So yes, you can get to the stability stage with one secure person and one not secure person. It's very rare. And it's basically impossible in the context that it's working to actually have two very insecurely attached people get to the stability phase. But if we have one predominantly secure person and they're showing up and doing the work, and then the other person's working as well, they're basically getting to the stability phase. And it can be because the other person's actually being reprogrammed by the behavior they're exposed to over time. Just like we could have somebody who is predominantly secure, gets into an abusive relationship, and is in that relationship for maybe they're married for 10 years to this person. And maybe it's just verbally abusive, but still abusive nonetheless. And then they walk out of that and suddenly they're fearful, avoid it, right? So we have neuroplasticity. Our subconscious mind can be changed, reprogrammed. And so whatever we're repeatedly exposed to will create that imprint. I know that was a really long-winded answer, but I wanted to give a lot of context there because it was a really important question. Okay, so Sarah. Hello, Sarah. How are you? So Sarah says, I'm struggling with seeing my partner's mom as a barrier to our future, as there is some enmeshment and he lives with her. I don't know how to bring up the enmeshment with him. Thank you. He is DA and slowly doing this work, and I am FA. Excellent. Okay, so that's a really good component. Since you're FA, the sort of rule of thumb we have when it comes to communicating with DAs is you always ideally want to introduce concepts that are personal, vulnerable, and might hit home in a way where you are keeping it on like the intellectual level. So the more you can say, hey, I learned this cool thing. What do you think? The more you can engage intellectually and not make it personal, the more of an impact it will have, because dismissive avoidants are generally quite clever, intelligent people. And so what you're going to see is that if you say, oh, I learned this thing about enmeshment, and as an FA, it was something I had to work on. It's so interesting, and you explain some of the concepts, and then you can say, who else do we know like this? Or do you feel like you have any of these patterns within yourself? Like if you can say it indirectly where you're not going, this is you, because the meaning they're often going to give, and not necessarily every single dismissive avoidant ever, but it's a strong enough pattern that it's a high risk. The meaning they're often going to give is, oh, you think something's wrong with me, I'm defective. And then that's usually going to be a huge barrier to want to talk about those things, to want to be seen, to want to approach these sorts of things. So if you bring it up in a more indirect way, it's kind of like it speaks their language, and it makes it more intellectual and about facts and interesting findings and learnings, as opposed to personal and emotional. So they're more willing to receive it. So that's absolutely how I'd bring it up. I would just touch on a few key points. I would say some of the cost. I would say maybe what it feels like. Teach about it and say, oh, I think I experienced it here and here. I imagine you had some of that as a recovering FA, Sarah. And then you can talk about it in that context, and that will be something that lands a lot better. So great question. Okay, so I'm going to answer one last question and then we are going to dive into the first exercise. So Natalie says, hello, Natalie, recovering AA here. Is it normal during the healing process to want to be alone a lot? Yes, this question comes up so much. Yes, 100%. It's just your subconscious mind equilibrating the relationship to itself. Remember, we always have this homeostatic impulse. And so you want this equilibrium. And so if we realize, oh my gosh, there's such a thing as a relationship to oneself, and oh my gosh, I've been out of the relationship to myself for so long, then the subconscious mind goes, oh my gosh, I'm going to get all my needs met. I'm going to focus in on that relationship to myself. And it can become sort of like hyper driven to equilibrate there. And so it's normal. And you're also breaking codependent patterns at the same time. And when we feel like we can self-soothe, when we feel like we can emotionally connect to ourselves, when we feel like we can strengthen our own self-identity and derive value and feelings of empowerment through that, all those different things usually will result or sort of culminate to produce like seemingly dismissive avoidant behavior relative to what you're used to as an anxious preoccupied person. And some I would say a lot of people will say, and this happens for fearful avoidance too, not just anxious. A lot of people will say, am I becoming more dismissive? And the answer is no, because the difference between wanting to spend more time and valuing that time and equilibrating versus becoming more dismissive is like I'm repressing my feelings. So in your time alone, you would just repress. You wouldn't show up for your feelings. You wouldn't be self-soothing. You wouldn't be doing personal growth work. There would be this like avoidance of self still, an emotional neglect of oneself. And for an anxious preoccupied to feel comfortable being on their own, you have to be self-soothing. You have to be like, to feel good about that, you can't do that by further dismissing your feelings. It's not going to be, because that need for connection, emotional closeness, intimacy, all these different things will be so big that to further avoid that would only put you into more anxious spiraling. So when you say I want to spend a lot of time alone these days, maybe because I feel more comfortable now, it's actually a really great sign towards you becoming secure. So excellent question. I'm so glad you asked, because I'm sure a lot of people come in and have that question often. So I just want to say hello to Lois and Yvette and Avielle. How are you? And Merlin, how are you today? And Julia and Arj, hello. It's so nice to see you guys. Ramona, Gabriella. Hi guys. Ruth, how are you? So I'm going to start with the exercise and I'm going to come right back and jump back off from Yvette's question. Lois from the UK, Preston, UK, amazing. So happy you're here. Okay, so pull your workbook up to page 9. Okay. And basically, I'll do a quick review. So basically what we've talked about so far, if you're just jumping into this one, we talked about the different rites of passage of each of the 6 stages. We asked you to sort of get really clear about what your relationship patterns are in each of those 6 stages, or where you find where you're either stuck now in the relationship you're in, or it's very common to have a stage we constantly got stuck on in the past. So for example, it's very common for fearful avoidance to get stuck in the honeymoon or power struggle phase. It's very common for fearful avoidance as well, if they start becoming secure and they're with a more secure partner, to feel like they want to leave in the stability phase because it's out of their subconscious comfort zone of chaos to a certain degree. And they can confuse that with like losing feelings and things like this. It's very common for anxious preoccupieds to have that same experience going into the stability phase if they get to a sort of secure spot. And of course, to have things not work out in the dating phase is really common for anxious. The latter parts of the dating phase, if that some of that anxiety comes out early, and that can be a really painful thing for anxious preoccupied. So we asked you to look at the patterns of where you get stuck or where you're currently stuck and you want to sort of break through. We talked about some of the rites of passage, some of the really important components of having clarity about what you want, clarity of what rites of passage or patterns you need to work on to break through to the next phase and to keep the life cycle of a relationship flowing. Then we talked a little bit more about the subconscious expectations. We spent a lot of time going through like what are healthy standards or expectations, what yours subconsciously are, and what you think people's were either in the past relationship you're reflecting on where you found yourself stuck, so you can do that self-reflection work and have that context, or in terms of what you understand about expectations of a person now that you're currently with, and really understanding that programming. So basically the first part of this is all about doing a deep dive on discovery of your patterns in relationships in the early phases. And so from page number 9, we're going to talk about transforming some of the anxious behaviors and coping mechanisms. And so basically the goal of this is to take a look at your patterns of behavior in your current or past relationships. And then we're going to create a strategy for changing and essentially reprogramming this pattern so that you can avoid the common pitfalls that you might be used to going through in your past relationships, or that you might find yourself patterned in terms of your behavior now. And so you can focus on any of the anxious preoccupied behaviors you experience. I put some really common ones in a chart on the next page. And these are ones that are very common in terms of the dating and even parts of the honeymoon phase of a relationship. And we put some strategies together, and we talk a lot about them in detail in the course. But basically, the point of this, as you go to page 10, is to actually choose a strategy from the course to commit to practicing. And by having some kind of repetitive feature involved in that, that's going to be the reprogramming activity. So this is sort of framed in like an exposure response way. It's like we're going to pick a strategy that we know will counteract this behavior that's unhealthy, or at least in extreme versions becomes unhealthy. And then we're going to repeat a new pattern of behavior so that we have a new action. We have the repetition, and every time we have a new pattern of behavior, it's of course going to elicit an emotional response. So we're doing reprogramming and work from an exposure perspective. So if you look at page 10, and we have other tools in here and stuff, and I'm just going to go through some common ones with you. So if we look at page 10, the first one that comes up is rumination. And a really great set of strategies you can use as programming. Number one, when you find yourself ruminating, it is beneficial, and it will not imprint you right away, to interrupt the pattern. Okay, basically when you're having rumination, it's almost always a stream of subconscious thought or pre-conscious thought. It's not your conscious mind intentionally thinking. And this is a really important distinction to make, and it's a little bit of like a mind warping thing, but it's an important thing to be able to observe as a human being. There's, oh my gosh, what's the guy's name? Bob Proctor. Bob Proctor. There's a quote by him, and it's not like a written quote. It's actually something I heard him say one time in a webinar years ago. He said there's a difference between thinking and actually thinking. And what he's saying, and what's important to recognize, is that we spend a lot of time thinking on autopilot, and that's basically just programmed thought. So if we have, let's say, for example, this core wound, I am not good enough, and then we go into a situation where we're out of our comfort zone, we're not going to be consciously and intentionally thinking thoughts from our conscious mind that's like, I am not good enough. We're probably going to have a stream of autopilot thought that are sort of the extension of that core belief, that are like, oh, this could go wrong. They're going to think this about me. They're going to think that about me. That's not you actually thinking. It's you thinking, but it's you not consciously thinking, okay, to make the distinction. And so we can get in rumination, for example, and that's basically a stream of subconscious thought. And it can be very helpful just to start by interrupting the pattern and then replacing with thoughts that are more empowering. So we can just do this. It's a very simple neurolinguistic programming technique. We can say cancel, cancel when we catch ourselves in this space. How will we catch ourselves in rumination? Because we want to start noticing what it feels like. All of our feelings are our alarm bells. So maybe when you're ruminating, you feel frustrated or helpless. And so if you can start getting familiar with those feelings and notice when you're ruminating about something and go, okay, cancel, cancel, and then think a conscious, intentional thought. Like, you know what? This is not serving me right now. I am good enough. And here's why. Or whatever we can do to upgrade our thinking from a conscious perspective. The more we repeat this, the cancel, cancel, and the thought upgrade, the more you'll actually see these streams of subconscious thought being set to rest, because we actually have a new repetition, like a new thought upgrade, and we have a new pattern that we're installing in there. And over time, we'll break down the cycles of rumination that take place. So that's one strategy, okay? And we talk a little bit about that in the course. Another thing is rumination is often telling us about an unmet need. So you can take a look and be like, okay, what am I ruminating about, and why is my brain trying to get my attention, and how can I meet my own need in that context, okay? And the more we have these things as a pattern, the more we rinse and repeat them, aka we do them over and over. We refer back to this strategy when we catch this old pattern of behavior showing up and sort of rearing its ugly head, so to speak, because it hurts us or doesn't make us feel good, when we keep installing a new pattern that shifts it, what you're going to see over time is these original patterns go away, okay? Because we're treating the underlying roots, either the wound that we say cancel, we have an upgraded thought, so we're doing thought and belief reprogramming, either by finding the unmet need that's underneath. You can do both if you'd like. Another thing too, if we find ourselves ruminating about a person, and this is an emergency one because we don't want to get too much into like programming to see negative things in people, but if we're really stuck, we can look at all the downsides of that person that we're focusing on, because sometimes we are seeing them exclusively through the positive lens, and sometimes it's an activating strategy. It's a way that we subconsciously perceive to make the excuse for people's behavior so that we can get our needs met, because the brain is a needs meeting machine, so it will do little sneaky things like that. But when we can do that and we can look at the downsides, sometimes it can just help equilibrate this one-sided perception. And again, when we look at the downsides of a person, so maybe we find ourselves, and this is common for people, maybe you got out of a relationship you know was unhealthy, but you keep being pulled back in your thinking, your subconscious thought or pre-conscious thought, you keep being pulled back towards that person. Well, what you can do is you can go, okay, what was not working about the relationship? What was unhealthy or didn't make me feel good? And you can reflect on that. And by reflecting and referring back to that, you have those reminders. So you are consciously reminding your own subconscious mind to equilibrate that thought stream at the subconscious level of the downsides of that person. And it can be a really good, quick solution to just sort of get you refocused and like, okay, wait, this is not a healthy dynamic. I don't want to go back there. So those are some strategies there. When we talk about overanalyzing, overanalyzing often is a subconscious strategy to create control or certainty in a person's life. So if you're overanalyzing something, you either feel out of control in some form around that issue, or that there's a lack of certainty, or both. And so what I highly recommend is, if you catch yourself doing that, okay, what do I feel out of control about? What do I feel uncertain about? What strategies can I put together to gain more of that in my life? Okay, and it can be relative to the exact situation you're experiencing, or it can be overall. So how do I, for example, it could be with a person specifically. Maybe you're overanalyzing. Maybe you need to go have a conversation and get certainty from a conversation in that specific context. Or maybe you overanalyze, and that's also feedback that, you know what, this is my way of trying to get control. And if I look at my life, I feel out of control in my life in X, Y, and Z area. And I need to have better habits. I need to have better schedules, routines, structure, things that give me a sense of control or autonomy over my life as a whole. And that can also be this sort of background equilibration feature. Okay. Again, I give like a whole bunch of different strategies in the course, not just like one or two, but I'm just giving you some examples. And again, you're going to just put this into like a rinse and repeat format. Okay. I'm going to go through the next ones at a high level, so that I want you to understand this exercise, but I don't want you to feel like we're going through all the details here. That's what the course is for. Perfectionism, what do we have to work on? Often self-acceptance, okay? Self-validation, self-encouragement, reprogramming beliefs that produce this in the first place. So ideas, not necessarily core I am beliefs, so we can do that too, but ideas that like, I need to earn my worth in the world. I need to earn love. A lot of those concepts and ideas, maybe because those are things you felt like in childhood, or maybe in a past long-term relationship, those ideas are going to produce this coping mechanism of, okay, if I have to earn my worth, or if I have to earn love, then I can't fathom the pain or the experience of making a mistake and then have love taken away. And it's this whole like underlying emotional inference that love is conditional. And to believe that about people you really love and care for, obviously is really painful. And yes, people can love it in a conditional way, but there are also very much relationships that can be unconditionally loving. And I won't go into all the nuances of that, but I'll give one example since I brought it up. Like, you might have a parent, for example, that will withdraw affection if you, or closeness or emotional intimacy, if you are doing something bad. Okay, as a child, let's say, maybe you scream at your parent and you throw something and it breaks. you might see a withdrawal of affection. And that can seem on one level like it's a form of conditional love. And to a certain degree, the way the person is giving love is conditional, okay? Because they're not going to just love you fully when you do that. They might withdraw. But that doesn't mean that that love from the parent is conditional, right? You might then go into your adult life and, knock on wood, and not to say this is a good thing, but maybe then you kill somebody out of rage one day. You might still have the parent and be like, I still love you as my child, right? So this is where we have this really interesting thing, and this is how the system of conditioning affects us so much, is because a lot of the emotional inferences we get because of what we see that version of conditional love, but it doesn't mean that we are conditionally loved. So it's an important distinction to make. And yes, there are people who can be conditionally loving overall. And yes, that's more likely to occur in like the early stages of a relationship, as we're falling in love, especially more with the image of somebody than who we understand them to be in their internal reality as we move through the life cycle of a relationship, especially as we get past that hump of the power struggle phase. But it's just important to know that there's a difference there. Okay. So the next one are too early syndrome. So really what this talks about in the course is this idea often that in the dating phase, because the needs of the anxious preoccupied individual are so strong to get into a relationship, to have closeness, to meet each other's needs, to get needs met, because that pull is so strong, sometimes an anxious preoccupied will jump into a relationship or try to pressure or push moving into a committed relationship and taking the relationship much more seriously before they've done their proper vetting. And it might seem like, oh, but that's what I need. But sometimes it's actually an abandonment of your true needs if you haven't taken the time to be clear about what those are, haven't taken the time to really do your vetting to see if this person can in fact meet those true needs, and get that feedback and understanding. And so it's a really important behavior to shift, especially in the dating phase of a relationship. And a huge part of how we overcome this, if you're an anxious preoccupied individual, or even if you're a fearful avoidant with a strong anxious side, is to practice strengthening self-identity. So to make sure that you have your balance in all 7 areas of life, to make sure that you are clear about who you are. Like, so much of the strengthening self-identity course is like getting clear about who you are in terms of your traits, your mission, your vision for your life, your values and morals, your personality needs, your beliefs, and actually being able to consciously intend, because a lot of that stuff, that programming, a lot of it just comes from pain and being imprinted, and they're not things that we would necessarily want as a part of ourselves if we had full choice and reign over everything. And so much of that course is also about, let me see what's not serving me and what I don't want to identify myself as, and let me work through reprogramming or getting rid of some of those painful programs I didn't ask for, and really shaping myself into who I want to become from my conscious perspective, where I get full say. And the stronger we are in there, it's like we were talking about in the webinar last night, the more we know who we are, the more we know or what we want, the more we know what to say no to. If we don't know who we are, we don't have that clarity and direction, then it's easy to just say yes to stuff or put up with things or push things along that we don't actually want at a deep level if we really took the time to investigate, because we haven't done that work. So strengthening your self-identity, getting a clear picture of who you are, who you want to become, all these different things is a very powerful thing to do. And then chameleoning. Two really quick things we can do is we can look at the long-term cost of this, always trying to contort ourselves into who we think people want us to be. We can actually look at the cost and evaluate how we're treating the relationship to ourselves and all of the inherent self-abandonment that takes place when you do that. Because the brain's very much wired to avoid pain, so that will be a big motivator to shift. And then as a perceptual shift that you can practice is like, am I showing up for who I am? Am I living with my thoughts, my behaviors, my beliefs, my emotions in alignment with that vision of who I am that I've taken the time to investigate, get clear on, show up for? And have I done that work to align myself with that? And the more, again, we have that strengthening of self, the less likely we are to fall into those patterns. And then lastly, if we find we're putting somebody on a huge pedestal, we can revert back and we can go inwards and go, okay, what are the downsides of this person, or what are the traits I'm not owning within myself, so that I'm looking at the upsides of myself that I'm not perceptually focused on. So maybe you put somebody on a pedestal because you think that they are really smart. And maybe you're like, wow, they're so smart. You have them on this big pedestal. Well, then you're probably not recognizing your own genius. And everybody has their own genius in specific forms. For some people, it's scattered across 5 major places. For some people, it's really focused in on 1 or 2. And sometimes we can look and we can go, oh my gosh, look, that person's a genius at math. And maybe you're not recognizing what a genius you are with your social interactions, or with how you hold space for other people, or a genius in the way that you create or design, or, and so we want to make sure if we have somebody on a big pedestal, we're looking at what those traits and qualities are that we think are so amazing, and that we're actually owning those things within ourselves. They might occur in different forms, but the actual trait will be there. So that's obviously our golden shadow work. You can do a deeper dive into that in the shadow work exercise, which is a highly, highly recommended course. But that should give you some big pieces. And then what I want you to do for the integration piece here is take 1 or 2 strategies that you want to focus on a week and just practice them on a daily basis. Pick one thing you can do daily and continue to do that until you feel like, okay, this has now become a normalized part of my behavior and who I am and who I understand myself to be. And this is now ingrained in my subconscious. It's a natural habit pattern in my life. And so that becomes that work. Okay. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to answer some questions, and then we're going to return back to exercise 5, the honeymoon phase, and some really important components in terms of just showing up for yourself in the 7 areas of life here. So let me see. Okay, so Yvette, and hopefully I'm not going too quickly. I know I'm giving you guys a lot of info, but again, you can always come back and pause and listen to this again and take some extra notes and stuff. It'll be uploaded immediately. Okay, so Yvette says, what are healthy ways to meet your needs for significance? Excellent question. Are there maybe AA specific ways or strategies that work better for AAs? Yes, this is a great question. So here is why. We can combine our needs with different things. And I won't get too far down that rabbit hole right now, but it's not uncommon for anxious, preoccupied individuals to actually combine to a certain degree. It's not the needs, but it's the way they get the needs met through the behaviors they use to meet multiple needs. So for example, it's common for anxious, preoccupied to sort of meld together significance with love and connection, and very much feel that going into a romantic relationship, being given a lot of attention or approval or compliments is love and connection, but it's love and connection with significance. And so the withdrawing of love and connection will hurt significance too. But what it's actually ultimately feedback for is that both of those needs are important, okay? And yes, we've put 2 together for how we get them met, and we can combine them, which is actually just your subconscious mind trying to be efficient in a way. But that can make it difficult when it comes to like meeting the needs for ourselves. So it's really important to separate them. Now, significance can be a whole bunch of different things outside of the typical context of like approval or power or control or these sort of like seemingly superficial things. It's not wrong to want approval. And that's common for anxious preoccupied. So please don't judge yourselves for that. But it can be hurtful to the relationship to ourselves if we are A, seeking approval externally, B, like sort of explicitly over seeking approval, or C, making our identity or the feelings we have in our relationship have some form of dependency on that. So significance can be beyond approval. It's okay to have approval as like a benefit to your life and to enjoy when you receive approval or attention from a loved person, like somebody you love in your life. That's going to be important, whether it's acknowledgement, whether it's words of affirmation. Those are healthy things to want to a certain degree. But if we want them in an out of balance way, then it becomes problematic. So if we think that that's really what love is, things like that, it becomes challenging. Now, significance at its deepest level is not just approval. Significance can be appreciation, it can be acknowledgement, it can be these sort of healthier versions of these things, but it can also be meaning. So what I find is very useful for anxious preoccupied individuals is if you can develop a greater sense of meaning in your life, which we get through strengthening our self-identity, which we get AKA from being like, this is the mission of who I want to be as a human being. And it doesn't have to be this like set in stone ingrained thing, but like, hey, I love doing X, Y, and Z. I'm going to put some of my time towards doing this. Maybe you love helping people. Maybe you love, being a good friend. Like, and the more you solidify what that looks like for you, helping people in what form, doing what on a daily basis, moving towards what in my career where I can do this on an ongoing basis, moving towards what in my friendships, my family relationships, the more you have this strong sense of meaning in your life across all forms, the less you'll seek significance through things like approval. And there's other components in there too. Like if we're seeking approval based significance, then where are you either taking away approval from yourself without meaning to by actually beating yourself up in your internal dialogue throughout the day and then feeling starved of significance because your teeter-totter is really out of balance? Or where are you just not approving of yourself? And so of course you seek it from outside of you because it's one of just the normal human needs that we have. And if you're coming from a place of lack, it has to be fixed. So significance can be, yes, approval, things like that. It can be, and yes, it can be like feeling control. But again, people can derive significance in a really unhealthy way through trying to control other people. Or you can feel personally empowered in your own life instead of seeking power or control over other people, personally empowered. And that will make you not seek in that form, right? And then we have acknowledgement, attention, things like this. And then we have like meaning, which is a much healthier version and deeper version that will permeate the subconscious mind much more, deriving meaning in your life. And then we even have things like meaning in a spiritual form. Like, do you believe in something greater than yourself? Do you believe in living a certain way through specific morals and values that are meaningful to you, that help you feel like, okay, this is me exercising the best version of myself, and that brings me enjoyment or meaning and significance in my life. So all of those things together would be like some of the really common forms and some of the ways you can operate within that framework. And it's really important to take a moment and to sort of take inventory around that as an anxious, preoccupied individual and see, what do I want to have more of? What do I want to push myself to live by more? What areas of this do I want to work on expanding a little bit? And so on. So great question, Yvette. Okay, so Arj, how are you today? So Arj says, hope everyone is having a nice time here. This is a lucky place. That's so wonderful. So Abiel says, is it possible to hit a wall with self-soothing? Last week was a particularly hard week with the I am disliked and I am unwanted / excluded wound coming up. And although I was questioning the stories, reminding myself it isn't entirely true, and providing pieces of opposing evidence, I still wasn't able to convince myself emotionally that all was well. I gave up for a few days trying to use the tools for a few days and just let myself feel low until something naturally shifted. Okay, this is a really great question. The self-soothing through the stories is huge. It's going to be so important. And most of the time, you're going to feel some relief like right away. But remember, the self-soothing also requires meeting the needs, right? So the first part is all the stories, and that's where we have suffering, but then we also have pain. And pain is when we have unmet needs, and when there's a consistency of those needs not being met, then it doesn't feel good either. And so to me, that's what I hear. I hear that you were doing an amazing job, probably for quite some time, on the stories, and that was working. And then you got really focused in on that, but then maybe you forgot about the needs part and strategizing on behalf of those needs. And so then you were doing the stories, but then this might have been a needs problem. And so like when we talk about the self-soothing tool, the one that I push everywhere and always talk about, the thought upgrading and emotional processing, which is really just a self-soothing tool. And we have in the form of a guided process, by the way, in the guided processes course, if you want just like a guided, more passive version of it that you just want to listen to. You want to go, okay, so maybe I did the story, I questioned the stories, but maybe I was needing like some things that are possible, Aviel, in there are, just wanting connection. And then if you felt like you were wanting connection and your need was unmet for it, then maybe even though you questioned the stories and found opposing evidence, you were like, but I still just want the connection, or I still want to have a conversation about this, or, I want to let somebody know how I felt in a situation. So there could be unmet needs for communication, for emotional connection, for certainty in where you stand in a relationship, things like that. So don't forget to target that underlying piece as well. But it sounds like you're doing really well with questioning the stories and having that awareness overall to the point where you're like, oh, I hit a wall because I'm used to this always working. So don't forget that other underlying layer. And that, by the way, that's like step 5 and 6, I believe, in the emotional processing tool. And it's what are the needs, or what is the need? It can be one or multiple. What is my strategy for how to get this need met? So you actually have a way of going out there and getting it. So great question. Hi again, Mel and Ramona and Ruth. So happy you're here, Ruth. Okay, so Gabriella says, send me angrily when I'm too overwhelmed by the other person. Oh, hold on. There must be an earlier part. Okay, here. Hi, I struggle with guilt and shame after I set boundaries with people, like I'm a bad person and I was unreasonable for doing this, and go into doubting if I did the right thing. This is especially when I react firmly or semi angrily when I'm too overwhelmed by the other person. The remorse can be consuming for me afterwards. I guess I feel like I'm abandoning the person by setting boundaries, which I actually am. Not true. We'll talk about that part. Examples include spending less time with my mom when overwhelmed with work, or my emotional need for space, or breaking up with my last ex by getting angry with him for how he treated me and telling him I can't be with him anymore, even though those are good for me. See, these aren't necessarily abandonments, though. We'll go through this step by step. And I have so much to say about this already. Okay, I know it's my FA guilt and need to take care of, not feeling I can trust my own intuition, not valuing myself, and fear of abandonment. Can you please advise more on practical steps for me to be more comfortable with myself in this? I feel like I'm in a transition period yet, where I'm at war between self-confidence versus deep-seated shame. Excellent. Okay. So knowing what I know about you and some of what you've shared, Gabriella, this will probably be the single hardest thing that you do. Because I think a lot of your survival strategy growing up and your upbringing was probably based on people pleasing and having to be there for mom, and the pain that you probably felt, and maybe some of the guilting mom might have done when you couldn't be there when you were a child, would have installed these programs in really, really deeply. So a few key things here. Number one, this is going to be the most important thing you ever do. This is going to be like the crux of healing, I think. Like, there will be other programs and stuff to work on, but like this is, if you get this, you're going to have a lot of stuff that comes out of it. So you're going to have like relationship to self, being able to trust yourself, being safe in the world because you feel like you can set boundaries and you can say no to people, feeling less trapped and helpless and powerless as a byproduct, which are big core wounds, having the ability to healthily communicate in relationships. And when you honor yourself and your own boundaries, guess what? You get into a more secure relationship with yourself. So then you will start being subconsciously attracted to more secure people, because that becomes part of your comfort zone, which is one of the 3 major features of attraction. So a couple of things in here. There's still a couple stories, right? So I actually am abandoning. In a sense, maybe you are, I wouldn't say abandoning the person who treated you really poorly in that past relationship, because it's more like setting a healthy boundary and it wasn't working. And you could argue that like the way he was treating you was a form of abandonment first, which then led you to just mirror back and pull back in your behavior. And I would definitely place it more in that category. But let me find where it was with your mom. Okay. Spending less time with my mom when overwhelmed. So because I spend less time with my mom, I abandon her. Is it true? And can you 100% know? And I want you to like look at that for a second. Okay, we're gonna do this as like a live example for a second. And take a moment and like sit with it and think about it and see what comes to mind. And then if we're looking for counteracting pieces of evidence, I would say, number one, is it possible that I might even abandon my mom more by going to see her when I'm overwhelmed? Right? Like, how do I act? Do I go there, but I'm not there? I'm like the emotional, broken down version of myself. Not broken down, but I'm not present because I don't want to be there because I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm not showing up to truly connect with her. And is it possible that there can be just as much, if not more, abandonment in going when you're being untrue to yourself, and maybe you're frustrated or you're resentful or you're feeling really stressed and you can't be there and you're not truly happy to see her, and really wanting to be there, and people really feel that at a subconscious level. And is it possible for me to truly be the highest expression of myself and show up in the best way possible to another person when I'm in a state of re-traumatization in the relationship to myself, when I'm in a state of hurting myself in the way that I've been hurt so much in the past by others? In my childhood, when I couldn't, do anything to meet my own needs, I didn't have any tools or awareness, and it's just not possible at that time, right? And I would look, what are ways that me setting a boundary doesn't have to be an abandonment? Do I still go back and see my mom in a few more days? Do I send a nice text, or can I make a nice phone call and touch base in a way that still feels like it's appropriate and okay for me? And when I start showing up in a way that really values and honors myself, is it possible that my relationship with mom gets even better? And what you'll see, and I'm telling you this from like walking with people through this hundreds and hundreds of times over, when we show up and we honor ourselves and we have healthy boundaries, and then we really want to give our time to people and we're excited to be present with them when we've taken ourselves into consideration, the relationship with that person improves. And there isn't really an exception to that. Now, we can still have the check-ins and we can be mindful. We can say, hey, mom, I know I said I'd be there this weekend, but I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. I just want you to know I still really love you. I care about you, and I'll look forward to seeing you in a few more days, right? Like, we can still do something to communicate nicely. But all you're going to see is that as you start to be true to yourself, you're the better version of yourself. You feel better about yourself. You have more emotional energy to give, more emotional bandwidth, and your interactions improve. So you can do some more work around questioning the story, other ways you don't abandon her. And you can even look at the downsides of going to see her when you're in a state of self-abandonment. And that will help to sort of push some stuff there. So great questions. Hello, Jen. How are you today? Okay, so let's see. I'm going to answer one more question, and then I'm going to go back to the next exercise. Let's see. Sorry, my cursor did the big jump again. Let me see. A lot of people saying hi. Is this a new webinar time? I can't ever attend the webinar until Saturday because of the time difference. The webinar time is the same for me. I wonder if there was a time difference that changed. I know we had daylight savings time like 20 days ago. I think it was November 7th. And I know that changes for different people. So maybe it seems like a webinar time. We've stayed the same from our end, and we try to change quarterly to adapt to new times. But hopefully you can always come to these ones then. And also 2 o'clock will be, I believe, 8 o'clock in the UK. So tomorrow's, obviously the Thursday evening ones are hard, but hopefully the Saturdays are available sometime, and the Fridays as well. And we'll add an earlier one at some point. We also have the morning routines, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so hello to Lois again. Hello to Nika. Welcome. Hello, Efrat and Jen and Natalie again, and Heidi. Welcome. Nice to see you guys. Hello, Michelle. Okay, so the question I have the question I'm reading is from Jen. Hi, Thais. As a FA, I too have a strong AA side. Can you please explain how to down-regulate? I'm a high-achieving artist with my own floral business. It's so hard. Okay, this is a huge topic. It's a really important topic. A few ways you're going to I'm going to tell you the best way to down-regulate, and you're probably going to have so much resistance to it. But I promise you, it's like a life changer. Somebody commented about it in the webinar, I think sometime last week, and I laughed about it. This is something I've done. I've tried a whole bunch of different things. This was the best way for me. And I've shared this with quite a few people. It's very random, but it worked so well for me, and it's worked well for a lot of people. When you're done your work day, okay, first of all, have boundaries. So I'll put this in layers, actually. Number one, have a boundary where you're going to stop working. So this can be like, and you're an entrepreneur, you have your own floral business. I do believe that when we're really living in alignment with our personality needs, so if you have like really high needs around like, art and creativity and maybe service and then achievement, and like maybe you're living a lot in those, and so you feel good, you feel energized, and so you have more energy to put into work. So you can be aware of that, and you can probably work a little more than somebody who works 40 hours a week doing something they really strongly dislike and feel really unfulfilled by, because to a certain degree you're actually getting your needs met, and this is going to be giving you energy back. But it doesn't mean you can just work all day, every day. So number one, have a cutoff time that no matter what's happening, you stop working at X time. Maybe instead of working from 9 to 5, you're like, well, I love this, so I can work 9 to 6 and feel great about that, or 9 till 7, but then we get into tough territory, So have like a fair cutoff that works for you. Number two, when you finish your cutoff, you're done work, go into your room and lay in your bed for 15 or 20 minutes and do not do anything. No phone, no technology, nothing. And just be with yourself for a second and just like reflect on your day. You're naturally going to have some resistance to it. Your mind's going to be very busy and wanting to stay in that high achieving mode. It's going to be really important. And what you're actually going to be doing during that 15 or 20 minutes is getting out of sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system doesn't have to be bad stress. Sympathetic nervous system can be good stress. Right now, I'm probably in sympathetic nervous system mode, and I adore doing these webinars. Like I love connecting with people. I love talking about this stuff. I love the novelty of like open Q&A and all these different things. I love the growth of everything, but I'm in like the on mode, right? And so even good stress, even when you're loving creating and doing things you're doing, Jen, like that can put you in sympathetic. Down regulating will be you actually just be. You're not doing anything. You're just being with yourself. And after research shows it takes about 7 minutes of actually being calm. Don't cut it at 7 because that's, you want to make sure you're beyond down regulated and you're feeling really calm. Then at that time, 15-20 minutes, get out of your bed and go do whatever you're going to do for the rest of your evening. And you can even set some like nice intentions for yourself. And then if you do anything else in the evening, I would make sure that you have a time you like get into bed so that you can down regulate getting into bed. Like you read for half an hour before you go to sleep. It's good to have technology away. The blue light from technology activates beta brainwaves, similarly to how coffee does. So it puts us back into more sympathetic nervous system mode. That's why people are like, oh, technology can interfere with sleep. There's other reasons as well, but that's one of them. So all of that will be really important, and just being conscious and intentional. And what you'll actually see is that by doing that effectively, you feel better on a regular basis, you have more energy, and your work and your relationships and everything that you want to pour into will actually feel like it's coming from a fully recharged space. So it's going to be important work for you to do, not just for your own well-being and health and personal growth, but actually for your business, for your relationships, for all the things that you are trying to create and do in the world. So great question. Okay, so yeah, the burnout easy is definitely coming from that like overwork, and then your brain's going to equilibrate. And I believe in the Enneagram big time. At some point, we'll talk about some of that stuff in the school more. But 4-1-3 makes a lot of sense. It makes sense you're a floral designer with the like artistic creative side and then the achieving mode. You're probably like in the perfect career for yourself. Anyways, okay, so I'm going to answer Michelle's question, and then I'm going to dive back into this here. So Michelle says, hi, Michelle, how are you? Hi, Thais, thank you for your amazing work. Thank you so much. I'm AA and wondering if it's possible to become leaning DA. I actually envy my DA boyfriend who keeps me at arm's length but seems content with his life. I'm working hard to become secure, but I find it's exhausting sometimes. Can I become secure in a current relationship, or do I need to end the relationship to really do this work? You for sure can do the work in the relationship. It's arguably slightly more challenging because you're thrown to the wolves a little faster. You have to actually do everything in real time. But I would actually say if there are certain like benefits and drawbacks of everything, but the risk is high. Like the challenge is higher, but the growth can happen more quickly because you're actually practicing these things in real time with people. So overall, and I, there's so many people that are, that do this work just in their relationships, and then it sort of spills out into every other area of their life. But you can do both. You do not need to be on your own to do it, though. When you're doing it on your own, you also have more time to like break through things, prepare yourself ahead of time, so it's easier to navigate when you do jump into a relationship. Not that it won't be without certain challenges applying the work with the person for the first time in real time. So benefits and drawbacks to both. You do not have to be one or the other. I don't particularly advise one or the other. And like, don't change your life to put yourself in one space or the other. And yes, it can be exhausting, but what's more exhausting, it can be tiring because it brings up a lot of stuff, right? And it can put a lot of like burden on us if we're the one doing the work and the partner's not. So I hear that and I see that. But what's more exhausting is to not do the work and keep repeating the same anxious cycles and patterns. Like if you sit down with the emotional processing tool for 15 minutes, if you're really triggered and you really go through it, or if you do it quickly on a small trigger for 30 seconds in your mind as you pull it through, that can save you hours of suffering, hours of activating, hours of feeling alone, afraid, these different things. So ultimately, it's always going to save you time and save you stress and potential not so great behavioral responses that are unconscious if we are triggered and we're responding from that place. So it's always going to be the best road to take. But what you want to check in with is, am I in a healthy enough relationship where I feel like, is this person doing the work with you, right? Or is this person at least showing up to respond in a healthier way, to upgrade his behavior, to be more open, doing this work with you as well. And you won't become a leaning DA, but you might be identifying, like we were sort of talking about earlier, you might be feeling like you're becoming more DA because you're actually becoming more secure and you're actually equilibrating that relationship to yourself. So that would be a good sign, if anything. But stay patient, keep showing up for yourself. I hear in here that you feel like you might be the only one doing the work. I think that's what you sort of mean by exhausting. That's the vibe I get. Of course, I'm not 100% sure. But just make sure too that the other person's showing up with you so that you feel a sense of fairness in it. Okay. So great question. Okay. So let's go to the next exercise. This is a really important exercise for the anxious preoccupied. Really, really important. So this exercise on page, it's like page 11 and 12 because I couldn't fit the whole chart. So this exercise is about keeping your identity and your sense of self in the honeymoon phase. Okay, so this is so important for the anxious preoccupied individual because this is going to be what prepares them for the power struggle phase. If an anxious preoccupied individual gives up their sense of self, their boundaries, their feelings, their needs, they don't communicate what those needs are. They're not checked in with themselves. They're not in relationship to self. And on top of that, they don't have healthy habits to help them maintain all the different 7 areas of life. The power struggle phase is going to be a doozy. It's going to be a really, really hard thing to navigate because I want you to imagine the degree of self-abandonment that takes place when you're giving up all these areas of your life to make the person you're dating the center focus of your world. So let's say you don't take the promotion at work, or maybe you're not showing up to work in the same way. You're not spending time with your family and friends. You're not managing your financial habits. You're not, all of these like layer by layer parts of self-abandonment keep happening. Well, what do you think is going to happen when you see a change in the pattern of a relationship, when you see somebody pull back? If you're already abandoning your sense of self, there's no sense of identity here. That person's become your identity. So the anxiety that will come out of that will be 10x what it would be if it was just you having your sense of self and relationship. And maybe you haven't even done, reprogramming on core wounds. Maybe you haven't even done a lot of work on boundaries and needs. Maybe you don't know anything about attachment styles, let's pretend. But if you kept the areas of your life in order and you had good habits, or you kept yourself, you saw your friends once a week, you saw your family once a week, you show up to do work, you have an evening to yourself every week, you are still excelling in your career, you still have good, healthy financial habits, you still have good, mental, emotional things that you're doing. Maybe you're learning, or you have hobbies or books that you're reading, or a topic you're really interested in. You have a spiritual practice that you take part in daily. Like, if you have all of this, the anxiety is going to be way less, even if you didn't reprogram core wounds. So what this exercise is here for is to help you be really clear on who I need to maintain, what I need to maintain in the 7 areas of my life. So I keep having this relationship to myself in these areas, so I don't feel absolutely devastated if something, if a pattern shifts in the relationship. And what often happens is the more anxiety is there, the more extreme the behavioral output, right? Like, if we feel 10 out of 10 triggered, we're more likely to use an unhealthy protest behavior that's much more unhealthy. Like, maybe try to make the person jealous or threaten to leave just to see the reaction, not because that's how you're feeling. And then this is where we start throwing stones in our relationship, right? It's like we start throwing stones at the glass. It's like, this is where we start having these patterns that, even though we just are trying to do these things and have these protest behaviors to derive closeness, we actually might be really pushing the other person away instead. So that's what we really want to take a look at here. So you start in this exercise by rating the 7 areas of life and your relationship to these areas of life from 1 to 10. And again, you can do this from the perspective of a past relationship. So, where I got stuck in the last relationship and what my habits were like, and reflect so that you have better preparation and insight for the future. Or if you're in a relationship now, you can check in here and see, or maybe you're in the stability phase of a relationship, but you just want to reflect back to the honeymoon, so that if you do digress at any point or anything like that, you have these healthy patterns available to you. Okay, so we're going to look, and I want you to start by rating from 1 to 10. How balanced do you stay in these areas while you're going through the honeymoon phase of a relationship? So, for example, in career, 1 to 10, how much do you keep career in check while you're in the honeymoon phase of a relationship? Does it fall by the wayside? Do you call out of work more often? Do you show up late? Do you abandon some of your dreams and goals and things you're working on to improve yourself in that area? Do you, or do you find, like, even if I'm in the honeymoon phase and I'm, really focused on this person, I still show up really well, and I still, like, never call out of work or go in late. And maybe you're like, I'm, an 8.5 out of 10, because maybe I don't work on myself and learn independently as much, but I still show up overall. So you're going to give yourself a rating based on that. You're going to do the same thing for mental. Mental will have a lot to do with, like, your hobbies. Like, are you learning? Are you reading? Do you normally read books or watch documentaries? Or do you have topics you like to learn about, or things you like to learn about in your spare time? And how do you show up in those areas? Or mental can even be like your thoughts and opinions. So it can be, maybe you have, like, certain political views, but then maybe if you're dating somebody in the honeymoon phase and they have differing political views, you silence yourself. Instead of making room for both opinions to exist and not having to have everything agree, maybe you don't speak up, you don't share yourself. And so you become out of balance from that perspective, right? So these are just some examples. Emotional. Same thing. Like, do you find yourself totally diminishing yourself in terms of your emotions? Do you find yourself making somebody else's emotions way more important than yours? Do you find yourself checked more into what somebody else is feeling than what you're feeling? Do you find yourself, when you get into a romantic relationship, only soothing through the other person, not self-soothing? So take a look. Do you have no emotional boundaries? Do you constantly think about that person and ruminate about that person, take on their problems as if they're your own, try to solve all of their emotional problems, but not show up to check in with yourself and how you're feeling, how you're doing, and what you need to work on here in your space? So take a look and see what patterns come up. Physical, pretty self-explanatory. Are you doing things like, maybe you love exercising, but then you get into the honeymoon phase and you skip going to the gym to make sure that you are always available for a phone call or always available for a text? Or, to go on a date all the time and you always say yes to time that works for the other person. Like, do you have a physical health routine that you skip? Is it the way you eat you throw to the wayside because you want to go to the restaurants the other person wants to go to? These are all very common patterns of an anxious, preoccupied individual, and they are all little tiny forms of self-abandonment that a secure person won't go through. There can be little tiny bits of it, but a securely attached person will say, no, like I have a plan to go to the gym and let's do something afterwards. Or if they can't answer the phone because they made that commitment to themselves, or if they don't want to go to a certain restaurant, they'll speak up. Or if they find themselves over caretaking emotionally for another person and not enough for themselves, they'll come in and re-regulate it. So you're really taking a look. Spiritual can be like a practice or routine. Do you throw that habit by the wayside? If you are like more religious and maybe you always go to that other person's church, or do what they want to do spiritually and you give up your own spiritual beliefs, that can be a huge form of self-abandonment. If you are like genuinely interested in that and you're like, wow, I just resonate with this new thing so much, that's beautiful. But if you are just doing it to get connection with the person and to avoid abandonment, then it can be a painful form of self-abandonment. Financial, do you stop checking in with your finances? Do you not budget your money for dates, for how much money you want to spend per month on dates? You just spend all your money or take on way more of the bills. And if you want to do that, and if you're making way more money than the person you're dating and you feel that that's a healthy, appropriate thing, that could be okay. But if you haven't checked in with yourself first and you're just doing it to do it and to please, then it's self-abandonment. It's painful. And again, these are going to create these like breeding grounds. You're like brewing the self-resentment pot, or not the self-resentment pot too, but the resentment of other pot at the same time. And the relationships, what I want you to focus on is like my friends, my family, my coworkers, the relationship to myself. Do I throw those things by the wayside? Okay. And then what you're going to do is some of those things I've mentioned, you're going to put a habit that you can take part in, that you will not abandon, once a week, to make sure you bring these things into balance. So, for example, career could be, I'm going to make sure I show up on time. I'm going to still do 30 minutes a day of something that helps me improve and learn a new skill related to my career, have a path for career growth. Maybe I want to change careers. Maybe I would journal for 30 minutes a day about what I'd be interested in doing instead, do some research. What is your 30 minutes a day? What is your habit to feel like that area is empowered? Mental, what's your hobby? What do you love learning about? What topics do you have? What thoughts and opinions do you want to honor? So basically everything we just went through, it's like a strategy to commit to and to have a checkpoint. And what I would highly recommend doing is, if you find yourself struggling with this, print this out, have your checkpoints all written out. Like, see how I wrote them out here to show you guys? So you can have this all written out and then reflect on it. Look at it first thing in the morning. Look at it last thing before bed. Make sure you're checked in. Oh, I could have done this today. I'll do it tomorrow. Oh, I can't wait to do this thing tomorrow. I'll structure it into my schedule right now. All these different things you can do to sort of give yourself that insulated sense of identity outside of just the relationship, which is going to be super important as an anxious, preoccupied individual. Okay, so I am going to leave off at the question in your stories. This is like your big self-soothing tool, and I'm going to come in here and answer a few more questions until right about 1:30. I have a pretty hard stop today around 1:30. Okay, so Julia says, hi Julia. So I hope this makes sense to everybody so far, and that this is like helping to navigate some of these dynamics that are at play, because it's very important. Okay, so Julia says, hi Thais, things have been very rough because my roommate's husband is dying, sadly. She comes home unexpectedly. I no longer have a bed to sleep in while she's here, and so much emotional overload from her during my work day. Wasn't ready for a big meeting, at risk of losing my big client. Getting an apartment in December, 100%. Told her not healthy for me. She apologizes, but and then I see that it says message retracted. But my question is, with my guy just thought it was important to know where I am this week. My guy and I are not in a healthy dynamic, several years in the making. I want to fight for us. Very sure of this decision. Oh, good. I like that. Took time away from it and got clear. Excellent. How do I get him to communicate with me again? 2 days ago, I left him a message asking him to communicate with me, but then said to him, "You run and I chase." Should I not have shamed him? Oops. Yesterday, I left a sweet thank you message for our holiday. Think he just moved, so I'm sure he is busy. He goes quiet to focus and build up this new space. He did this when things were new, and I'm really good with us. I am really trying to be vulnerable with him and upbeat. He responds well to positive and upbeat. But how do I get him to communicate again without shaming? When I tell him in person my boundaries and needs, he responds well. But I think he has moved farther away, so it is harder now. Really need help with this because I want the emotional connection and intimacy from him. He is really wonderful that way, working on self and soothing self. We moved through dating and honeymoon phases too fast. We were located in the same building, so then it helped us work through it. Now we're so far apart. Thank you so much. End. Okay. A couple things. So number one, sorry to hear that you're going through that with your roommate and her husband. It definitely sounds like a really challenging dynamic. It sounds like you're trying to set boundaries, which is good. I would have, like, whenever we're in kind of this emergency mode with somebody, and especially in a dynamic like what you're going through, I would say, listen, I really want to be here for you, but I'm also really rebuilding myself at this point. I'm pivoting in my business. I'm going to go back and rebuild my relationship. I'm working on healing myself. So I want to be here for you, and I want to be mindful. And I know that you're going through so much pain. Why don't we just have like a 15 to 20-minute chat once a day, and that's going to be your time to just vent, and I'm going to be here for you. Usually I have to pick what that time period is. I said 15 to 20 minutes. Maybe you have 30 minutes of bandwidth a day. Maybe you have 10 minutes. Maybe you have 20 minutes every other day. You have to design a time where it's like, I have this time that I can give to my friend. I can be present. Outside of that time, I'm going to ask that we talk about different things, and that we don't have that kind of conversation. So that's definitely how I would show up in that area, so that you have a solution that's there. Often when people feel like you're not present, they pour more because they feel like they're not getting their needs to be heard met. And then it just becomes like pervasive. And then it becomes a lot more challenging for you. And it's really managing. You want to be there for your friend, of course, and you have to not abandon yourself in the process. So I would pick that as strategy number one. Number two, I'm so happy to hear you're getting an apartment in December. That's very exciting. And I think that will give you that certainty feeling again, because I know that you've been craving that for a long time. Even you not bringing that up tells me that you probably have had enough certainty in that area that this is where you're coming from. So that's really, you have enough certainty that you didn't ask a question around certainty this time. So that's fantastic. Now, the next one is with your dismissive avoidant. If you are clear, if you've taken time out, you've really reflected, you're super clear, I fully support you in that decision. You took the time to get really clear about it. Most important thing. So the next thing is, if you want to reconnect, it becomes you reaching out lightly and consistently over time. Again, sort of like playful, fun, light, happy. And as you build that connection for really about 6 weeks of that light connection, that's consistency, sharing, all that kind of stuff, then you can reach a point where then you start introducing some of the deeper conversations and opening up more about feelings and needs and things like this. And ideally you do that for the first time over the phone instead of over text. And so that's how I would go through the whole process. And with that set of intentions, now you have sort of a roadmap there. So good for you. Awesome. You're taking action, communicating your boundaries, all these different things. And I see as well that you are clear and intentional about everything you're doing, which is absolutely fantastic. So, okay, so let's see. So Aniko, how are you? So Aniko says, hi Thais, any tips on how to overcome the core wound, I'm ugly? As an AA, I have addressed most of my negative core beliefs, but this one I just can't get rid of. Some days are better, but some days I think my body and face are almost distorted. It sucks to feel this way, and it makes me question people's attraction towards me, which leads to insecurity. I tried to write lists on what I like about myself, but overall it just doesn't help. I find a problem with a lot of the things that I see in the mirror, even though I know in my mind it can't be that bad. Any tips on overcoming this? Okay, beautiful. So thank you for sharing that. And what I will say, a couple things in here that are really important. Number one, um, that is not the core wound. The core wound are like the root wounds. So underneath, there's still a deeper core wound, and I would touch on that. Just see what's underneath there first. So if I believe I am ugly, what do I make that mean? That I am not worthy of love, that I'm not safe in relationships. What's the underlying, and I would work on that first as an underlying piece, because it'll make this other belief you've created easier to identify. Then number two, you're going to pick like literally one thing you can do, one part of your body or face to focus on a day. And I don't want you to sit there and go, oh, why it's so beautiful and why all these things. You are going to do that more long term, but first, because you feel stuck there. And I'm sure you're an absolutely beautiful person inside and out, but this is going to be the best framework when people get stuck on this. Number one, get rid of the underlying core wound, the meaning you give to that, so that original belief doesn't suck all this power out of you at the same time, because it's linked to something so survival oriented. At a subconscious level, if there's a survival oriented belief, right? Like I'll be abandoned is a survival oriented belief. And so if you make it mean that, then that's going to be painful. So make sure you do that first, number one, in the way that they're linked together, not just the belief individually. Number two, look for things that you appreciate about your body. Not the things that are beautiful, not the things, that's going to be third. We're going to start more general and get more specific on any belief we feel stuck on. So you're going to go, what do I appreciate? Like, let's say we just look at different parts, okay? And you can pick one body part a day, like my torso, my legs, like whatever it is, my face. What are the beautiful things that come out of this? So you're trying to have some appreciation and gratitude towards yourself first, which when we have these painful beliefs about ourselves that we develop, it can really distort the way we look at ourselves. So it's hard to find the beauty in ourselves as human beings. And this is like, people have this with body dysmorphic disorder, all kinds of things. So when you can really get clear on having some appreciation, once you feel gratitude for the fact that your body exists, for the fact that your face exists, for all the things that it does, it allows you, to speak with people, hug people, connect people, walk around, move your body, survive, live, breathe, meditate, like all these things. When you start feeling appreciation, then you're going to work on the belief that you're stuck on. And then you're going to start to look for beauty. And by working on the appreciation first, you're going to pull back that huge program that I imagine you installed in there a long time ago. And you're going to be able to see your beauty and appreciate and respect yourself and the beautiful parts of yourself there. So that's the order that I would do things in. And again, it's just following this map of like starting general and then becoming more specific over time as we find ourselves really stuck on something. So excellent question, and thank you for sharing, and keep me posted with how you're feeling. Okay, so I'm gonna have to run because I do have like a very hard stop. A language to communicate with my mother about heavily pressuring me to force myself on holidays to interact with relatives that I feel I have no desire to interact with. You can do one of two things. Sorry, I know I just said I would stop, but I just saw this last question in here at the bottom of my chat. So what I would say is you can do a couple things. You can set boundaries, okay, where you actually just have strong boundaries out and you go, these are my boundaries and this is where I am and this is why they matter. This is why they're important. You can over-explain your boundaries to give context. You can, number two, compromise if you feel inspired to do so a little bit, and like I'll interact up to a point and be clear about what those boundaries are. And number three, you can set a strong boundary with your mother. If you're going, look, like you're not respecting my boundaries, this is where I am, I will not speak about it again and I won't be there. So you can do it in stages of your boundaries. But the thing you really want to do, Shayna, and you want to make sure of, is you want to make sure you're tuned into yourself and you're really taking yourself into consideration. Do I have room to interact and make a compromise? Could I grow in some way from doing that? Could these relatives who frustrate me be my teachers? Or have these people done so many things that are so painful to me, it's a self-abandonment to do that. And so you want to find within there, right? Like, where are you at? What's your bandwidth like? Is there room for a compromise, or does it become a self-betrayal? And if not, then you just have to over-explain your boundaries and perhaps set stronger boundaries with your mother. And I would do a little bit of work too if you find that the answer is like, no, the only healthy thing is to not abandon myself. Do a little work on reprogramming your beliefs about that you need mom's approval or you need mom's understanding or whatever it might be. Still communicate, but have a little bit of reprogramming work done with that boundary specifically. So, okay, I'm going to super run, but I'm going to do a webinar tomorrow at 2 and 3:30, and I'll be able to stay a little bit later at the 3:30 one for extra Q&A, stuff like that. We will pick this workbook back up for next month. I'll have a webinar schedule out later today for you guys as well, so stay tuned for that. And thank you so much. I'll be posting it in the Facebook group, and then you'll get an email about it a little bit later on. I don't want to send too many emails for today. I know my team sent out one earlier. So thank you all for being here. Hello to Halima. Hello to Natalie. Hello. Oh, I think that was how to humanize the people. I must have missed this question. Who do noise like the neighbors upstairs. Look for the sponsoring intention. Look for the points that you can relate to those people where you've ever done that and why, so you come from understanding. But also don't be afraid of setting a boundary and communicating. Sometimes we feel frustrated because we're not actually speaking up fully, and then we keep that resentment because it's the lack of communication taking place. So feel free to share how you're feeling and what you're experiencing in that as well. Good question. Hello to Ben. How are you? Adriana, hello. So happy you're here. Hello, Anna. Nice to see you guys. Hello, Callisto. So nice to see you guys. And Amanda, hello. Okay, I always just want to say hi to everybody and see who's all here. But thank you guys all so much for being here. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Hello, Oslam and Sarah. And Magni, hello. See you guys tomorrow. Thank you. Talk to you soon. And happy Thanksgiving for people too. Bye. Or afraid that you're going to leave him or things like that. And so it can be a two-way conversation. Maybe he needs reassurance or things like this. So that's there. And then just make sure as well that you're questioning your stories, because sometimes when we see a loved one going through that, it's really easy to sort of stamp on personal meaning to the situation and go, oh, I'm not loved, or I'm not cared for, or things like this. And then we're just adding like more layers to the challenge there. So it's really important that you do your beyond due diligence. If you are choosing to invest yourself in that relationship and you know that there's going to be, inherent challenges in that to a certain degree, then it's very important that you have strategies there for yourself to offset some of the imprinting that could take place because you're going through that experience with him to a certain degree. So hopefully that gives you lots of information there on how to deal with that. And I will go into 2 or 3 more questions here, and then we will dive into some of the power struggle stuff. So, hi, Gabriella. How are you today? Gabriella says, hi, I'm FA leaning AA. Something Mike said in his social got me thinking regarding treating others how we would like to be treated. I feel, for example, I tend to help people a lot with career and practical advice, as people helped me so much with this in the past when I really needed it, and it's had such a positive impact on my life. I'm wondering whether I can be controlling, though, in this, which may just be my own fears. I fear being controlling as I had 2 dominant parents. Would love to know some signs someone may exhibit if they're not requiring / ready / willing to be helped in general, and I am being too pushy. Thank you so much. I just feel like you're constantly self-reflecting, Gabriella, and reorienting and healing and all that stuff. So it's so nice to see. So I would say some really good things is, number one, you can ask if you're feeling concerned or you're unsure. Like, you'll see some people, for example, who are going, oh my gosh, thank you so much, I really appreciate this, and who are so thankful, and that's obvious. if there's some people who are kind of on the fence and you're not sure, like, am I invading them? Am I giving too much advice and it's coming across as being pushy? You can just ask. That's always going to be the best strategy. You can say, hey, I'm really passionate about giving advice. I love helping out, and this was so meaningful for me. So I'm trying to sort of pass that along. But if you just want a little bit, or you feel like you're good and you don't really need my help, please let me know. So you can sort of ask permission. And I know that there's some people, I'm personally very much not like this, but I know that some people are, and it's not a good or bad thing. It's neutral. It's based on different people's programming. But I notice sometimes in the Facebook groups, I'll see people comment things about how, like, they don't want unsolicited advice from other people. So maybe they share a problem, but then they didn't actually want advice. And I think it's important to clarify that if anybody's feeling that way. And some people don't want advice because they can associate it to criticism or things like this. And so, we can just ask permission for people. Hey, I know some people don't want advice and want to figure things out on their own, but I found a lot of value in this. Are you okay if I share some stuff with you? And just keep it like really high level and simplified, and that keeps, just by being so direct, it just makes anything that could go wrong out of the way there. But I'm sure the vast majority of people would really appreciate it, and it's nice that you're trying to pass along your knowledge. That's fantastic. So great question. Okay, so Evie says, hi, I'm not sure if it's Evie or Evie, but hello and welcome. Hi, I'm having a hard time knowing what I want in a relationship. I often deactivate strongly when we're together, but when there's a threat of him leaving me, I go into insane pain from abandonment and activate again. I don't know what I truly feel versus what's my activating slash